Okay, everyone, it's just about 6:35, so let's get started with our Green Mountain Audubon presentation this evening. I'd like to introduce, my name is Tom Gimacello. I'm a member of the board of the Green Mountain Audubon, and I'm serving as your Master of Ceremonies tonight. I'd like to introduce our president, Jeff Hallstrom. Jeff?
Thanks, Tom. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jeff Hallstrom, president of the Green Mountain Audubon Society, which is a chapter of the National Audubon Society covering Franklin, Grand Isle, and Chittenden counties in Vermont. If you receive this Audubon magazine and you live in one of those three counties, you're probably a member of Green Mountain Audubon Society, so thank you for your support. If you're interested in joining, I pasted a link in the chat to our website. It enables you to get more information, join the chapter, or simply make a donation to Green Mountain Audubon Society. And again, we appreciate any donations that you make, but these programs are offered freely to the public in the spirit of generosity, so you don't need to donate, but thank you. Our chapter is located in northwestern Vermont, a region which has been sacred to indigenous people for thousands of years. The Western Abenaki are the traditional caretakers of these lands and waters. We respect their connection to this region and remember the hardships that they continue to endure. We give thanks for the opportunity to share this place, and let's commit to helping to protect it. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks and welcome again, everybody. We have people popping in. So tonight we have a really fun and interesting presentation. We are honored to be joined by Trish O'Kane, who, as it was said in our intro on our website, is, quote, an accidental ornithologist. I myself had to reread that twice because I thought she was an ornithologist who simply had accidents, but perhaps she'll tell us about that. It says in nearly 2 decades writing about justice as an investigative journalist, she never paid attention to nature. Just imagine that. But then Hurricane Katrina destroyed her New Orleans home, sending her into an emotional tailspin, I can just imagine, and thus entered a scrappy cast of feathered characters. First a cardinal, urban parrots, and sparrows, then a catbird, owls, bittern, and a woodcock. All cheered her up and showed her a new path. So we tonight are going to find out about that past and that path. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter and introduce to you Trish O'Kane. Trish, take it away. Oh, one more thing. Folks, if you would like to ask Trish a question, simply type it into the chat. Once you type it in the chat, I am going to wait for an opportune moment to ask that question. But rest assured that all questions you have about Trish's presentation tonight will be relayed to her. Perhaps when we're over in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to change the settings of security and you'll be able to see each other and you'll be able to ask your questions by raising your hand. But for now, this is the way it has worked for us. Trish, away we go.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, and I will look forward to seeing all your wonderful faces later on in the presentation. Well, first of all, I want to start by thanking this group because I've been in Burlington 8 years, and I'm kind of a solitary birder, except of course when I'm birding with my students and the children in my program. But this group has been incredibly supportive, especially Lucy Lehman and Allison Brody and Pat Phillips. Thank you so much, Pat, for helping me get the grant for binoculars for the children of Flynn Elementary School. Also, Debbie Archer has come and spoke to my students at UVM. And other members and board members, people like Alan Strong and Amy Seidel, who are comrades and colleagues, who from the very first day I landed in Burlington have been so generous and supportive and helpful with the work that I do in the community and also the book. And another thank you for hiring so many of my student mentors whom I've trained, and you've given them the opportunity to become professionals and to use the skills that they learned in my class. So this is the book, if you can see it. It is coming out on You'll see, it's got a lot of birds on the cover. I'm sure you all like that. It's coming out on Tuesday. It will be officially published by HarperCollins, the Echo division. And it's already getting some really good reviews, which I'm very happy about. A little surprised. I didn't expect this right away before it was even published. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review. Scientific American gave it a lovely review. Kirkus, LitHub Book List, which is the American Library Association. A lot of libraries are ordering the book, which is wonderful. LitHub, NPR is starting to show interest in it. I've had a reporter following me around from VPR now for 2 weeks. She was with us yesterday, and she's coordinating with the producer of All Things Considered. And that was a little nerve-wracking because I can control what I say and do, but I can't control what 50 young people say and do. And I did not know what the kids were going to say to the radio reporter yesterday, and I still don't know what they said. So, but hopefully nothing untoward. And so I'm doing a lot of media interviews already, and the book is taking off, so to speak. So what is this book about? As in the introduction, it was explained, I was living in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. Before that, I was a human rights investigative reporter. I worked for 10 years in Central America. I'm originally from Southern California. After college, I went to Central America. During the Sandinista Revolution, I was recruited by a Jesuit priest who was working with the Sandinistas, and I was recruited to go work in his research institute in Managua. And that's important. It's in the book, because that experience had a huge influence on my life, and it had an influence on how I run my birding program. Because something I learned in Managua was that you don't do just what you want to do. You do what's needed. And to understand what's needed, first you have to just listen. And when I got to Managua right out of college, I just finished a master's degree in journalism. I'd studied Central American history. I thought I knew a lot. And I got to Managua in the middle of a revolution and a war, and a lot of poverty, 60,000% inflation. And I realized all the things that I'd studied, that was all very nice, but I didn't know how to change a flat tire. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a water engineer. Really, I was just pretty useless. I could speak good Spanish and I could write, but that was all I could do. And that was a really important lesson for me to learn. And it took about a year for me in Nicaragua, just listening and reading a lot and going to a lot of meetings and sort of being a fly on the wall for me to understand how I could fit in and what I could actually do. And I carry that same knowledge or lack of knowledge today when I am working in my community and listening to the children in the program. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain chronologically how I got to the point where I am right now. So I was in Central America for 10 years, and then I moved to Montgomery, Alabama to work at the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I went from doing human rights to civil rights and hate crimes research. I was in the Deep South 8 years. It was wonderful work. And while I was there, I stumbled into teaching. So I'm not only an accidental ornithologist, I'm an accidental teacher. I never wanted to teach. I said, I won't be a teacher because I grew up in a super traditional Irish Catholic family. And really for a woman, the only roles were you're going to be a wife, you're going to be a mother. And if you work, you could be a teacher or maybe a nurse. And so I said, well, I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to go join a revolution instead. So that's what I did. Didn't make my mother very happy, but anyway, may she rest in peace. And I became a teacher anyway. So how that happened, I was in Montgomery, Alabama, working at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and a friend invited me to go into a women's prison where there was a volunteer program. And it was one Saturday a month, aid to inmate mothers. And my friend said, look, we go into this prison and we take donuts and we take children's books and we meet with the prisoners' mothers. It was a women's prison. It was the worst, at that time, the worst women's prison in the United States, a minimum security prison, but just horrible abuses. So we went in one Saturday morning and we each were paired with an inmate, and we sat with a tape recorder, and the prisoner picked a book, the mother picked a book that she wanted to read on tape to her kids. And so my job was to tape her while she read, and then take the book and take the tape, put it in an envelope, and mail it to her kid. And while I was doing that, the very first day, one of the prisoners I was working with, her name was Paulette. After I finished, she grabbed me and she said, "Trish, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I'm a writer. I work at a civil rights institute." She said, "Well, we need a writing teacher in here. Will you come help teach us to write?" And I thought, "Oh, I don't really want to do that. I don't know." Anyway, she asked for my address and started mailing me poetry and her writing, and the other prisoners started mailing me stuff. My mailbox was filling up, and I ended up as a writing teacher in Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama, and I loved it. And so, accidental ornithologist, accidental teacher. The ornithology part came when I moved from Montgomery to New Orleans to teach journalism at Loyola University, which is a lovely place. Unfortunately, my timing was very bad. I moved to New Orleans in July of 2005. And if you remember, Katrina hit on August 29th, 2005. So my husband and I had just moved into our new home. We had hung the paintings. We'd had our first crab cake party. We lived in a neighborhood, a low-lying neighborhood, about a 5-minute walk from Lake Pontchartrain. Beautiful, beautiful place, and a half mile, unfortunately, from the 17th Street Canal. So we moved to New Orleans right before Katrina, and we've evacuated, obviously, before the hurricane hit. If we hadn't evacuated, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you. It's entirely possible we would have drowned. Our neighborhood was completely destroyed. Dozens of neighbors drowned. Our house had to be bulldozed. So before that happened, I thought birds were okay. I mean, honestly, I never noticed them. People say in Central America, what kind of birds did you see? I was doing human rights work. I was in Nicaragua for 4 years. Then I went to Guatemala for 6 years, where I was working for the United Nations and for major media. And because of our foreign policy, 200,000 people had been slaughtered in Guatemala by a military that we trained and financed. So I was investigating massacres and interviewing people who had been tortured, and even interviewing torturers. Birds, zero, but I didn't dislike them. But then I moved to New Orleans, and Katrina happened, and I realized that, oh, this climate change thing is real, because we were getting warnings for about a month before the hurricane that the water in Lake Pontchartrain was warmer than it had ever been, ever, since scientists kept records of the water. And so the newspaper, the Times-Picayune, and of course we had just moved there, was warning people, look, this is going to be a rough hurricane season. You need to make your hurricane evacuation plan and plan for your pets and get all your papers together. And I thought, well, we just moved in. I'm going to start teaching. I'm working on my syllabus. I don't have time for this, and it's not going to happen anyway. And so we just kind of ignored it, which was really stupid. But fortunately, about 48 hours before the hurricane was going to hit, we realized we got to get the hell out of here. This is going to be really bad. And we left. But when we came back, we weren't allowed back for 40 days, because all the houses had to be searched by the National Guard for bodies and all these things that are in my book. And I probably don't need to repeat, because most of you probably saw it on CNN. Anyway, for me, it was an epiphany. I realized I had no clue I was living on a wetland, or even what a wetland was, or what that word meant. And that the way I lived, the poisons and toxins in my home had poisoned the water. We'd left my truck behind because it was burning oil, and we were afraid to evacuate it. So we left a car behind that causes its own little oil spill. Think of what's in your refrigerator. Think of all your computers. Just imagine your whole home. Our home was underwater, filled with water, 11.5 feet of water for 3 weeks. And it was only 12 feet high. So just think of all the toxins that we use. And so I was so ashamed and guilty and distraught by all that, and realizing I'm a person who lived by the motto, do no harm, and that I had done so much harm. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details, but some of that's in the book. Most of the book is not at all about Katrina, but Katrina is that moment when, oh, wow, this is real. This is real. This climate change thing is real. And how are we going to live? And how am I? This is my question I had in Louisiana before I left. How am I going to live on this planet without destroying it? How do I learn to do that? So we left. I decided to go to graduate school, went back to school at 45 years old to get a PhD in environmental science. And we ended up in Madison, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is a fantastic place. It's like a giant science candy store. And we moved right across from a large urban park called Warner Park. It's 213 acres. And you all know what happened. I took an ornithology class, and that was the beginning of a whole new life. I started noticing birds in New Orleans because when I was so depressed after what happened in the storm, I began to watch birds kind of just to calm down, but I didn't know what they were, what species they were, why they were there. I just was so happy in New Orleans after Katrina when I was teaching to see anything alive, because a lot of the animals drowned. But of course, the birds, some of them could fly away or perch or hide. And so that's when I started noticing birds in New Orleans. But then in Madison, I take the ornithology class and totally went off the deep end, became completely obsessed. Our professor, he's in the book, Mark Barris, he's one of the heroes of the book. He was just an amazing lecturer, so enthusiastic. And he said, once a week, you have to go birding for an hour. Same homework I give my students now at UVM. You have to go somewhere for an hour every week and watch birds. And so I was living across from this gorgeous park. And I thought, well, I'll go in there. There must be some birds in there. And that place, Warner Park, I found 141 species. This is in an urban park. Over half were neotropical migrants. So, I mean, I ended up practically living in this park because it was right across the street. After 2 years of birding in the park, like every day and on weekends and owling at night, I discovered by accident that there was a city plan to develop parts of it. And half this park is already very developed. It has a 32,000 square foot community center. It has a baseball stadium. There are rock concerts. It was the launching pad for the largest fireworks show in the Midwest. I mean, we're talking about a park with probably the most heavily used public park in all of Wisconsin. But there was this wild side that had not been developed, where I was watching the birds. And I lived right across from that wild side. So I found out about the city plan, and it would have cut down a lot of the trees on the wild side, cleared out a thicket, which is where I was finding tons of catbirds, which is a bird I ended up doing a geolocation study on for my dissertation. And when I read the city plan, I was horrified. And so I began organizing with neighbors to stop it. This is where the kids program comes from, people. I met with a city councilor. I started going to public meetings, and my city councilor for that region said, look, she wasn't happy with me trying to stop the development plan, and she wasn't a birder. And I think she just thought I was another clueless, privileged, NIMBY white enviro. And that's what I seemed like, because I wasn't connected to the community. I'd come out of nowhere defending the birds. And that really was not a good way to organize anything. But we were trying to stop this plan, and we did. We were successful, but I realized that we were not going to be able to stop it in the long term if I didn't have roots in the community and if I didn't meet some community need. But I didn't know what those needs were. It was just like being in Managua again, kind of. So I met with the city councilor, and even though she was pretty pissed off at me, she's now the mayor of Madison, she said, well, look, if you want to do something, you're a graduate student, you live next to that park. She said, there's hundreds of children living in apartments, lower income apartments around the park. And there's no programs for them in the park. There's no environmental education, and a lot of them are latchkey kids. Why don't you do something about that? And I thought, okay, I don't have any kids. I don't know anything about kids. I've never done environmental education. I'm just barely learning about birds and biology myself, but she's right. There's a need. There's a beautiful park, and there's all these kids. I'm going to try to do something about this. So, and also I thought, well, if the kids fall in love with the park and they become the stewards of the park, their voices will be much more important than mine to defend it. Maybe people will hear their voices differently, and that will be the best way to protect the park. And that's exactly what happened. I was very lucky. In my PhD program, my PhD advisor supported this whole organizing effort to protect the park as long as I documented it and did environmental history research. So my dissertation, and I write about this in the book, it became an action research project involving neighbors, children, elders, the birds, the other animals that lived in the park, and a big citizen science research project. So fast forward, I finished my PhD, and 8 years ago, I was lucky enough to be hired here at UVM. And the people who hired me were very interested in what I had done in Madison with the children's program. And let me explain how the kids program works. It's called Birding to Change the World here in Vermont. In Madison, it was called Last Child in the Park, How Kids and Birds Can Save the Planet. And that Last Child in the Park comes from Richard Louve's book, marvelous book, which influenced me a lot when I was a graduate student. Of course, Last Child in the Park, no, not Last Child in the Park, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And Richard Louve is an ally, and he blurbed my book. I'm sorry, okay, my program, I wanted to explain to you how it works. Here's how it worked in Madison. Here's how it works here. Is there somebody on the chat? Oh, there's a couple of people I see.
Right now, we're just listening to you, and there are no questions yet.
Oh, no questions yet. Okay, so I'll explain how the program works, and it exactly like it worked in Madison. So I teach a class at UVM called Birding to Change the World. I recruit 25 really wonderful potential mentors. Students have to apply to be in the class. It's not an open enrollment. We're working with people's children in my neighborhood. On Monday morning, I take those students birding. Some of them have taken ornithology with Alan Strong or Michael McDonald, some of the wonderful teachers we have at UVM. Some of them know nothing about birds, but they want to work with kids. But they fall in love with the birds really quickly too. So Monday morning, I take them out all over Burlington, teach them about birds. And we also have discussions about what we're going to do on Wednesdays. Wednesdays, we go and work with the kids. I take them to Flynn Elementary School, which is just a few blocks from my house. So I work in my own neighborhood with my neighbors' children, which is really wonderful. We get there at 2 o'clock. We walk into the gym, and the kids start screaming, "The college students are here, the mentors are here." They just love, love, love their mentors. So each kid gets the same mentor for the whole semester. They form really tight bonds. I mean, it's amazing. Within a week or two, you see kids walking back from our adventure, grabbing the hand of their college student. So what do we do and where do we go? Wednesday, typical Wednesday. This was not a typical Wednesday. So yesterday, we go to Flynn, and we get there at 2. And the first thing they do for the first 10 minutes, it's very fun. They meet, and they have to socialize. But the children have to assign homework to the college students. Every week, the kid gets to give their mentor 2 research questions. They're supposed to be science-based. We're working on that. The kids like to ask all kinds of crazy stuff. But I tell my students, just first few weeks, do whatever they ask you to do, because you're building a relationship. So there's 10 minutes when my students are handing this copy to the child, and the child has to read it and then grade it. And some of the grades aren't very good because the kid doesn't like the answer, or, as a 5th grader pointed out to one of my students last semester, she said, "Where's your sources?" This is the 5th grader to the undergraduate. You don't have any sources. You could have made this information up. How do I know it's true? She gave her a B-. And she taught her a lesson about, hey, you don't just rip stuff off the internet or Wikipedia. You have to have a source on that. That's the 5th grader teaching the 20 or 21-year-old. After those 10 minutes, we have a little circle, reiterate the rules. Basically, the number one rule of the club is don't die, stay alive. They can pretty much do anything as long as they're kind to each other and stay alive. And then we leave the school running kind of as a herd. A lot of these kids like to run, and they go straight down through the Flynn Woods and then along the bike path to the peninsula area called Durway. So we spend 3 hours outside, do some birding or not. They climb trees, they do whatever they want. But yesterday, I have to tell you this because this was crazy. Yesterday, I had the radio reporter with me from BPR, and I was just praying that the kids they behaved themselves. We left the school building, just opened the school door, and I opened the school door and I look out and all the kids are out in the schoolyard. Instead of running to Durway, they're out in the schoolyard screaming and pointing and with the binoculars. And an eagle, a bald eagle with its talons, was flying over the school, flew into my neighborhood right across the street from the school. And we stood there for 10 minutes and watched it. And then another one joined it. I don't know what one of my neighbors has in their yard, if they've got a fish pond or a rotting corpse or something. But we had 2 eagles across the street from Flynn Elementary School yesterday. If someone knows what's happening with the eagles in Burlington, I'd really like to know because I've never seen this before. So then after that, we ran to Durway, and the children, are trying to work towards their binoculars. Thank you very much to this group for that grant. So each one of these kids, I told them yesterday, look, we just got this grant. I have binoculars that you've been using. They're not very good. And honestly, the kids have never been interested in the binoculars. But when I told them yesterday, you're going to get your own pair to keep and to take home. They'll be yours, but you have to find 30 species and you have to do it with your mentor because somebody has to check it out and make sure that it's correct, right? That you got it right and use the field guide and all this stuff. And they've never been interested in any of this. And yesterday, all that changed. The children were running around trying to build their lists, trying to understand how to use a field guide. It was amazing. Some kids saw 10 species of birds, and they'll learn their binoculars in a couple of weeks. So this group has really helped me with my program because I'm not a birding evangelist. I think it's so important for children's health that they just get outside because we're imprisoning our kids in little desks all day long and making them sick. That's something I would love to talk to the group about, how to lobby and change the school day. I am not just interested in setting up birding clubs. I love what I do. I think it's important, but we have resegregated our education system between public schools, some of them in Burlington, where the kids have no recess time. That's insane. Schools surrounded by beautiful woods, segregated between public schools with little or no recess time, certainly not enough according to health standards, and forest schools, homeschooling, all these wonderful alternatives that we are building. But that's at the cost of the children whose parents can't afford those alternatives. So I'm witnessing a resegregation of our education system. It's deeply disturbing. And I think it affects children of color more, some or lower income kids, because those kids are going to go home and maybe their parents are working 2 jobs or there isn't someone at home right when they get there and they're on a screen instead of outside. And so they are spending more time on a screen, which we know from all the studies is terrible for their mental health and their academic performance. So much so that some school districts now in states, and I'm sure you've read this in the news, are banning phones, which personally I think is a great idea. But I know, there's some disagreement about that in Vermont, and Dr. Mark Levine just came out saying, well, can we really do that? we can't do it in elementary school. We don't let our kids eat Twinkies all day long or drink Kool-Aid in the schools. Why can't we say you can't use that phone in your school? Because that's one of the problems we have with the program. One of the first problems is those kids do not, fourth and fifth graders do not want to let go of their phones. And so we have to kind of wean them off them.
Trish, I'm going to cut in for a minute.
Sure,
Okay.
please
We
stop.
have people, just a little, I'm wondering, we have people leaving. So is the last 5 minutes talking about education, was this part of, how does this play into the book and working with, can we go back to the kids outside and what are your aspirations for them once they get the binoculars?
Um, well, I want them to use the binoculars as a tool on their own in their yard or at home. Maybe they can teach a sibling. Um, if we all remember what it was like the first time you looked through binoculars, and even it doesn't have to be at a bird, at a plant or a frog, and you just realized how incredible nature is, how beautiful. So I'd like them to use them for birds, but also for other creatures. And I think binoculars, they help you slow down and notice more. So, and I also think it will give them a confidence and a feeling of, oh, science is really cool. I get to use this cool tool and I have it and I earned it. Right.
I will tell you that when I wintered in Sarasota, I taught a class on how to use the eBird app. And
Uh-huh.
maybe we can talk a little bit later, but I think we, the Green Mountain Audubon, would like to support maybe, I know that many students in the Flynn School may not have access to that,
Yeah.
but the program that, iNaturalist
Yeah.
and also eBird, I think I see a role there. So we'll talk about that another time. So what are some of the kids' reactions when they finally do find the bird in the field guide?
Well, I just see a sense of deep satisfaction, right? And I can relate to that. I remember what that was like because again, I just started birding in 2006, right after Katrina, but not birding really, just watching birds, right? So that's not that long ago. I mean, I'm a baby birder compared to people in this group and incredible experts. I'm not an expert. So I can relate to the kids' feelings when and then yesterday they were looking at gulls and they noticed that one of the gulls flying over the lake shore had very black wings and was larger, right? It was a greater black-backed. And so I helped them kind of find that and see the range maps because at first they were like, oh, it looks like that one, but oh yeah, that one's in Alaska. And then they had to, the field guides are great. You're learning geography, right? They're having to read. So
And now you have two questions, Trish.
great.
The
Okay.
first one is how many kids are involved in your program? Is it 25? Is it 25 for a one-to-one relation with their mentors?
Yes. Yes, there are 25 kids at Flynn, and I have 25 students in my class. So it is one-to-one, which is very important because some of the kids, they have several siblings in their family, and this is the only one-on-one kind of adult time they get. So they really enjoy that 3 hours a week. According to school staff, that really means a lot to the child. I think it means a lot to the college students too, right? And you have to realize it's not just the kids that are addicted to the phones. A lot of my students, they even during class will be you have it the phone and they'll look at it several times during class, even though they know they're not supposed to do that. So, and they're lonely, and there's a serious mental health crisis on our campuses. I mean, it is scary. So for them to
Pat
work with,
Phillips, let me field the other question for you.
sure.
From Pat Phillips, another member of our board, he types, Are students developing a greater appreciation of nature and the environment beyond birds? In short, is this work helping students to develop an, quote, ecological, unquote, sense?
Yes, Pat. Just yesterday, a little girl named Savannah was teaching my students all about the fungi on this long, fallen tree in Durway. And there were several different kinds of fungi, and they were wild colors. And this little girl knew all about it because she had a science class in fourth or fifth grade about decomposers. And she was just pontificating there in the woods like a little professor. So I mean, other kids were looking at birds, but it's whatever's there, right? And in Durway where we work, there's a time in the spring where the garter snakes come out. There's an area there where they hibernate, and tons of frogs. So there's all kinds of it. Two mink. I saw two mink last Sunday. There are beaver. There's a whole beaver workshop. So I mean, the otter. So there's many different kinds of animals, and the kids, the mentors, the college students have to draw tracks for the kids, and they have to draw a bird, one bird or one or two birds a week. And so they're learning tracks. And of course, now we have some nice snow, thank goodness. So they were yesterday trying to see if that was a mink track or a beaver track. And so yeah, all of it. It's all important.
And we have a follow-up question, and that is, how do you select the 25 kids if more than that apply for your program?
I think I'm assuming you mean by kids, you mean the children in the
Yes,
school.
the 25 students at Flint.
I don't choose them. That's an after-school program. And the staff and the school decide there's a waiting list to get in. There's a demand. I've had demand from other schools. I can't meet that demand. There is a huge demand for these kind of clubs.
Mm-hmm.
But the school chooses the kids. The superintendent's twins are in my club. They're wonderful. The school chooses some children to be in the club. They may have some behavioral issues, and they especially need the wild time outside because our kids are not getting enough time just running, playing. Some of the kids, they don't know how to climb a tree. We teach them how to do that. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm getting old, but what had happened to kids going outside and climbing trees?
So now you're getting questions thick and fast. Have teachers and students, families, been supportive of this work?
Incredibly supported. I get emails from parents. Last semester, at the end of the semester, we had an art show in the school. There was an arts educator who came with us and took pictures with permission of the parents of the children and the stuff they did. And then in December, she did a whole art gallery in the school, and parents and kids came, and the kids were showing, look, Mom, I did this and that. And a mother came up to me of a boy in our program, and he's a great kid. They're all great kids. But he never seemed interested in birds or even the program. I mean, he came along, but his mentor didn't really think he was that interested. And this mother came up to me and she said, thank you so much for what you're doing. She said, I've been so afraid because of budget cuts. With my son, we can't afford to send him now to any of his other extracurricular activities. She said, this is the only thing he has. Every Wednesday night, he comes home talking about it, how much he loves it, tells us all about it at dinner. And I thought, really? That's amazing. He's not the kid I would have thought would have been talking about it at the dinner table. So, there's this thing with the kids and the culture of cool, and they don't want to seem like they like something too much. He's one of those kids. But the mother, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, is your program going to be cut? I said, no. She said, you're not going anywhere? No way. We're going to be here. Don't worry. And she had me practically in tears because she said, because of COVID, it's been so hard and so many things have been cut. And her boy needs to be out running around, and he loves having the mentor and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, fantastic. The school's fantastic. I've been working with them 8 years.
And now we have a question from our president, and it's a little more macro. And he writes, Is there a way to scale this program to have a wider impact, that is more students, even if it had less deep of an impact? Or is that not a good trade-off? What are your thoughts?
Well, I so appreciate that question because I'm going back and forth on that. Um, I personally have chosen not to expand. The university continually has tried to push me to, and I've pushed back because of safety and because um, I just don't, well, it's mostly because of safety. I mean, if you take all those kids out there and they're running around, I mean, we're working along a river, right? And so that's my number one fear is one of those kids is going to go to the river. And so I couldn't do it. But if there were a lot more people, we could do it. But here's what I'm really thinking is more important. We have to change the structure of the school day. There is a grave injustice being done in our education system right now with not letting kids go outside. It's terrible for their health. It's causing a massive mental health crisis. And the solution, we're lucky in Vermont, we have beautiful schools with beautiful schoolyards. We need to get recess time back. Recess is becoming an endangered, it is an endangered species. It's become extinct in some schools. And there's a mountain of health studies documenting what I'm telling you. So I would like to lobby to change the structure of the school day, and I think we could do it in Vermont. So I'm heading more that direction. I have a student intern, a researcher working for me right now, gathering data, and she's already discovered there is no data set in our state on recess time, because I just wanted to know, how has recess time changed in the last 30 years? I mean, I know it's decreased. I know that just from working in the schools, but there is no data set.
I have a question for you. I too come out of an education background and have had the experience of students who went on and studied and became teachers and then had their lives as teachers. How many years have you been doing this program?
So I did the program in Madison from 2010 until 2015, and it's still running in Madison. A graduate student took it over. I trained someone, and it's still running every Wednesday in Madison. I've been doing it here for 8 years since I came in 2016. Brown University copied the model. So there's a program in Providence. I teach a history professor at Brown. I went down there 3 years in a row and trained her. In her program, she's working in the public schools, and it's in Spanish and English because a lot of the kids are Latino, which is really cool. They did a birding field guide just for Providence in English and Spanish. I thought that was really cool. I would love to see a field guide to the birds of Burlington in English, Spanish, Nepali, Bhutanese,
Right.
and some of the African languages that the kids in my program speak. That would be
So 8 years times 25 kids is 200 kids. Can you share with us some of the students who have gone on and how have they furthered this experience in their lives, either personally or professionally?
When you say students, are you talking about the
I'm
children?
talking about the children in the club, in the Flynn students. Because
Right.
if you started 8 years ago and they were fifth graders,
Yeah.
the oldest alumni of your group could very well be college freshmen.
Yes, that's starting to happen. I wish I had a better answer and I could give you numbers because I haven't tracked the children. I haven't had time to do that. I would love to have tracked them individually, but I do know this one because this is a crazy story. So in the very first class, there was a boy who he just screamed all the time. He was ear splitting, loud, really sweet kid, very hyperactive and very smart. A couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I was in Delta Park. I was going to bird in the morning in Delta Park at about 7 a.m. And I was on my bike crossing the Colchester Bridge. And a young man came by on a bike and passed me. And then he stopped. He said, Trish. I didn't recognize him, of course, because he was a young man. And he says, I'm so-and-so. Remember, I was in your birding program. This is at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember you. And he said, did you see the whatever phalarope out there in Delta Park. And I was like, what? You were out early this morning. This young man he's one of the top birders in New England.
Fabulous.
He started in my program, and his younger brother was in my program. This is another thing about the program. It's a family tradition. Many of the kids in my program, several right now, are younger siblings of older participants who have gone on. So yeah, their families waiting to get into the program. So I'm sorry, that's the only one I can tell you about. But I do see them, and I know that they've gone on to Hunt Middle School and they've gone on to BCS, to BHS, but I don't know exactly what they're working in or what they're doing. I'm sorry. I wish I did.
Not a problem. So we have about 10 minutes left of the hour, but here's a question for you. Your title is Birding to Change the World. Can you describe a couple of ways in which this work is changing or has the potential to change the world?
Well, I guess I'll start personally. Again, the story that's in the book. It changed my world because I was very depressed after Katrina. And then when I'd been a journalist sitting in front of a screen to work inside most of my life, and I couldn't do that after the hurricane. So I just started sitting outside because it felt good. And I didn't really even know why. And then I started watching the birds. And as I did that, my heart rate slowed down and my stress hormones went down, and all of the physical changes that happen that we know now that have been studied that happen. And so it changed me physically and emotionally and mentally. It calmed me down. I noticed this same thing with my students. Many of my students every semester tell me they love doing their birding homework because they feel better while they're doing it and afterwards. So it's having the same, and this has been studied as well, the mental health effect. That's one way it changes our world. And I think that's a really important way, given the mental health crisis we're facing. Another way it changes the world is it's a wonderful lens to use to teach birding for privilege, socioeconomic and racial privilege. And for example, this is an example from the book. When I started teaching in Madison, and it's the same as Vermont, you're teaching in a cold climate. And so a lot of the kids, their families can't afford $25 smart wool socks, right? And every winter, I have students who say to me, college students who will say, what's wrong with some of these parents? How come they don't dress their kids well? It's like, okay, let's do a little clothing privilege exercise. I want you to write down and make a list for your homework of everything you're wearing and what it costs. I'll tell you what my clothes cost, because I've done this list for students. I've put it on the board, the $100 undershirt, the $25 socks, the $200 boots, whatever. It was like $600 in a day. And my students then calculate a family budget, and they're stunned to realize, oh, a lot of people in Burlington couldn't afford to buy winter clothes, much less once for themselves, much less for 3 or 4 children. And so it's not that the parents don't care, especially with inflation. So that is definitely a way that birding changes the world, is if you're in a cold climate, is the barriers, right? And for students to start realizing this. I think another kind of just at a deeper level, and as birders, you can all relate to this, it slows you down and it makes you be quiet, which is something in our society that's not very common, right? Just sitting and listening or watching. And when you do that, you notice other things too. And especially birding in your neighborhood, like I'm birding in my neighborhood, I'm not just noticing the birds. I go to a woods near my house where there's an eastern screech owl that has been coming into my yard at 4:30 in the morning and calling, which is really wonderful. But I'm in that woods, and I also notice it's on the edge of public housing, and that there's trash. And there's teenagers sometimes in there smoking pot and doing whatever, and I talk to them. And so I probably, if I wasn't out there birding, I wouldn't notice them, and I wouldn't get to have conversations with them and be thinking about my neighbors and how they use the woods and what they think of it. So you see the birds, and hopefully, Dr. Drew Lanham's work, he talks about, he's written in Audubon's magazine about this. You're not just seeing the birds. Hopefully you're, broadening your scope of what you notice.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's an entry into another part of the world that has not been part of the world of perhaps either the Flynn students or the more privileged college mentor partners. I think it's an amazing program. I guess I will field one of the last questions. There's none in the chat left, but what are your hopes and aspirations for this particular program? And how is it that you think organizations such as the Green Mountain Audubon Society could support your work?
Well, you're already supporting my work, and I'm very grateful. I'm thinking.
Tell us, what have we done, Trish?
Well, you gave me the binocular grant.
Oh,
I mentioned that already, didn't I? Did I forget?
yes. And if you're smart, you'll ask for another one.
I'll ask for another one. These kids want the binoculars. Also, Lucy Lehman has come, and Allison Brody took the class. I mean, so members of this group have been very actively involved in the program and supporting it. So I'm just and giving jobs to my students, a place to go and use those skills. I'm thinking about the future. I want to use this book to make a greater impact. And I think these clubs are really needed. So there's a role for birding groups across the country. There's also a need for more intergenerational groups and activities. I mean, my students need elders. They are so afraid of the future, and for them to talk to someone who's been through a war or, been through a couple of different rough US administrations, it helps them. It gives them perspective. So I think the segregation of ages in our society is really a problem. And a lot of the birding groups tend to be older folks. So I'd like to see, but I'm not sure how it would work. And I don't want to run a big, huge thing. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm writing other books for HarperCollins. But really what I want to do is use this book as a platform to bring back recess and benefit millions of kids in our country, not just 25 a week, as much as I adore them and I'm going to continue working with them. Recess. I'm sure we're all old enough in this group to remember what recess was, and it is disappearing.
Well, I thank you. We do have one very specific question from a attendee who writes, do you have an email that you can share? I would love to get some information on the catbird geolocation project you did in Wisconsin. And I would suggest that perhaps if you feel like doing it, you would use the chat and direct message this person. I can relay it. What I'm going to say to our attendees is I am going to actually turn on your video and turn on your sound. And what we'd like you to do is if you have a question from here on in, just put your hand up and Trish will be able to see it. So let me work a little magic. Trish, what's ahead for you in this book? What kind of book tour? Fill in for me while I do some work.
Okay. Well, so next Tuesday, I'll be at Phoenix Books, and they are doing a launch. And then you all are doing a launch kind of party in Shelburne, which I'm very excited about and honored, on March 20th. And I will show a beautiful PowerPoint with lots of fun pictures of the kids using your binoculars. I am going on a tour over spring break. I've been invited to Madison, Wisconsin, back to Warner Park, the Wisconsin Book Festival, and the university, and Milwaukee, the Urban Ecology Center. I've also been invited to Montgomery, Alabama, New South Books, and probably New Orleans. And then I'll do a West Coast tour after school gets out, because I can't travel very much. I have to be here Mondays and Wednesdays. I wouldn't miss a Wednesday for the world. I have to be out there with those children to make sure they're okay. So yeah.
Well, that's great. And again, I encourage everybody to click that little symbol on the stop video so that we can see you. And then we're going to open it up for a general question and answer period. So I see some of you have done it. I see some fellow members of the board. If you have any questions and you would like to unmute yourself, hi there, Danielle. Say hi to Jacob for all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have a question that they would like to ask directly? Pat.
Trish, I just wanted to say you're preaching to the choir to a number of other former educators here. I mean, since
Right.
No Child Left Behind, this driving thing for testing in schools has driven kids indoors. And it hasn't really yielded results. And thank you for your work that you're doing. I think it's just so important. But we got to get the testing stuff ended and really focus on what's important, which is relationships and the world, not sitting and doing pen and paper or computer.
Thank you, Pat. I don't know how to do it. So if you have all of fabulous educators, if you have any idea how to change the system, or what can we do? Because
yep,
a lot of us.
Don't we have something you'd like to talk about? Don't we have a something that Lucy has been instrumental in with our board? Don't we have a book signing and an event coming up?
She mentioned that while you were working.
March 20th. March 20th. And yeah, Lucy's leading that endeavor, and I'm really excited about it. And I love the Flying, is it the Flying Pig? I think that's the bookstore in Shelburne. So it'll be really nice to be there as well, because there's great birds in Shelburne too. So yes. And as far as the catbird question was concerned, there's a whole chapter in here about that study and about my field research. And so buy the book. Not only the study, but you'll get the story, and it's a funny story. It was something being out there 3 summers in a row in Warner Park catching catbirds. Yeah, I love catbirds. They're really cool.
Does anyone else have a question that they would like to ask to our presenter, Trish?
This is a really simple question. What time on March 20th at the Flying Pig does it start, Trish? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't.
We'll have it on our
we'll send an announcement out to the people on the mailing list. So I was just going to paste that into the chat right now, just so that people have that.
Can I ask you all a question?
Sure.
Surely.
Yeah, I just am struck by the latest survey. It was 2022 of the National Park Service, that there are 96 million people in the United States who love birds or love to watch birds. I mean, that's a lot of people. And I've been thinking about that. And have you thought about, I mean, that must be numbers of people who cross political lines. Our country's so divided. So people who love birds, we have that in common, and it's such an important bond. And I wonder, has there been any strategizing on how we could leverage that?
I'll answer first while Pat and Jeff and Allie and our other board members think about it, and the young Danielle gives us an answer. I think that, by us offering our outings and our events, our outings typically bring, 12 to 25 people together. And not only are you following, a leader who is going to be talking to you about the birds, but there's all sorts of other conversations that happen always. And, as people get to know each other, they get to know their stories and what's important to them. So I also see that large number of, whether it's people who just want a feeder outside their window or they're curious about what's in the park next door to them. I do think that birding is a venue that allows people to participate at many levels.
One of the things we struggle with, Trish, is, we do a bird outing, field trip at 7 o'clock in the morning, and a single mom with 3 kids isn't going to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So we're trying to figure out how to be inclusive. Having a multi-generational walk would be a change for us. And, a lot of people on the trail look like me with, white hair like this. So we're trying to figure out how to be more inclusive on a couple different dimensions.
One idea for you, Trish, and this involves Pat and our organization, would be if the students in the birding club at Flynn are very used to going down to Durway, perhaps, we could organize a walk. It would not be that hard for us to find actually 25 participants who would like to join the college student and the young Flynn student, and perhaps the three of them we could all go on a walk together. I think that's something that we can perhaps explore if that's something that's of interest to you.
Yeah, the problem with that is, I mean, I love the idea because, again, the intergenerational is everybody has to go through a background check and fingerprinting, and we go through an elaborate process. It's arduous. So I don't see that would work, but I would definitely be interested in conversations about other ways that the group could be involved in the schools. I mean, I know that there's people are experimenting in the school district and in other school districts. Ripton, for example, I took a bunch of students down there at the request of a teacher who's a friend. It was a Friday morning. She just takes her kids out on a walk. And she invited us to come with them. And so what if every school in Burlington had a couple of your fabulous volunteers who went and did weekly walks or bi-weekly or daily walks? That's getting more exercise into the school day. That's what I'm thinking. And there definitely would be a role for people in this group. I mean, I think you'd be fantastic volunteers in the schools, and it would be really fun. So it wouldn't be the same as doing a big, huge club, but you would definitely be doing something and helping the teachers out too.
Adam has posted that he found the time on March 20th of your event. The Flying Pig has the event listed as March 20th at 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. That's probably not right. Or it's going to be a really long event and or you write a really long signature. But thanks, Adam, for checking that out. Methinks it's probably 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., but we'll get that.
Unless we're going birding.
Yes. Yeah. I'd like to thank you on behalf of our organization for coming with your wisdom, with your experience, with your stories, and sharing with us, and also letting us know about your work. We wish you all the best in your continued madhouse of a press tour. And thank you, and tell the students that we were thrilled to be able to help them get their binoculars. And I'm telling you, as an Italian boy, wink, wink, you might want to talk to us again. I think we can help you out again. All right?
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. And thank you.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you to our attendants. Our next presentations are going to be young women scientists. We have 2 or 3 more, and we're going to wrap up the series with the popular Zach Coda, who's going to be talking about rare birds in Vermont. So we would like you to check out the greenmountainaudubon.org website and look at what else we have coming up, including our outings. To everyone, I wish you a good evening. Stay warm, stay safe, and get ready to buy the book.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish.
Nice to see you all.